The world keeps pretending this is all just bluster between Washington and Caracas, but anybody that's paying attention can feel the temperature rising. Airspace is shut down now. Drug boats are getting blown out of the water. Secret calls between Donald Trump and Nicolas Maduro. Nobody had that on their bingo card. A collapsing currency and a population that's being held together by remittances and hope. This is the kind of pressure cooker that eventually could explode. And while politicians are trading threats on camera, ordinary Venezuelans are the ones that are staring down the very real possibility of a conflict they didn't ask for. Well, you don't have much time left. It's Medicare open enrollment season, that magical time of the year when the government hands you a stack of fine print, 24,000 plan options, literally, and a 3-week deadline to somehow not ruin your retirement. Most people throw darts at the wall and pick a random plan and end up paying thousands of dollars more every year. It's basically a Super Bowl of stupidity. Here's a better idea. Call Chapter. They're the only national Medicare advisors who actually compare every single plan, all 24,000 of them. Their advisors are on salary, which means they don't make a dime extra for shoving you into a garbage plan. They work for you and not for the insurance companies. You'll talk to a real human being when you call them. Patient, honest, shockingly helpful. They'll walk you through everything in under an hour, and it's free. It's fast, and they'll even tell you if you're already in the right plan. So no pressure, no nonsense. Unless you just love paying too much and losing your doctor, pick up the phone. Call 636-812-6714. That's 636-812-6714. Medicare open enrollment is open right now, but it closes December 7th. And when it closes, that's it. So don't be the person that waits until it's too late. Call Chapter right now. So let's talk about what's going on between the U.S. and Venezuela here. Tensions are continuing to escalate. President Trump declared the airspace over Venezuela closed. He said in a press conference, but it's actually been closed for some time. That's been evident because airlines that fly from Panama to Venezuela have canceled their flights. And Venezuela is retaliating against those airlines, saying, well, if you're not going to fly to Venezuela when there might be a war, then we're just going to cancel your license so you can't fly to Venezuela ever again, which is tantamount to stabbing yourself in the face to make your significant other feel bad. They've been doing a lot of anti-air training over Venezuela, around Venezuela, especially up by the coast. And now the airlines have said we probably shouldn't be flying over Venezuela right now. So they're just stopping all the flights to and from Venezuela. That's causing some issues too, because there are actually a bunch of migrants from Venezuela who've been trying to get back there. Here in Panama, we had, during the Biden administration, the last year of the Biden administration, 2024, more than 1 million people came through the Darien Gap. Now, the Darien Gap is like 40 or 50 miles of impenetrable jungle, although it's not so impenetrable anymore because so many people have traipsed through there. They almost made a human superhighway going through the Darien in 2024. That all came to a screeching halt as soon as Donald Trump got elected. And now what we have are migrants going back the other way, people that were in the pipeline that made it all the way to Mexico. I went to Tijuana and interviewed some Venezuelans who literally made it right to the U.S. border, and before they could cross, Donald Trump got inaugurated, and he immediately deployed the Marines along the border, and they stopped all the illegal crossings. And those people were like, oh my gosh, I sold my house, gave up everything. It's been months of travel trying to make it here, and now I can't make it into the United States. So they've had to try to find some work, try to make a little money. It might have taken them a year or more to try to make their way back to Venezuela and start again. Some of them didn't go to Venezuela. Some of them went to Chile. Actually, a lot of Venezuelans went to Chile because they could make almost as much money in Chile as they could in the U.S. As a matter of fact, hundreds of thousands of Venezuelans who left their country did not go directly to the United States. They went to Chile. They got a job. They were making good money. Chile has an election coming up in about 100 days, and the guy that looks like he's going to win is a Trump-like figure, and he is putting out campaign ads saying, if you're here illegally in Chile, you've got 111 days to get out. And if you don't, we're going to grab you and kick you out with nothing but the clothes on your back. You're going to lose everything again. So a lot of those migrants have been working their way back to Venezuela. So they are going north into Peru, and so many of them are crossing illegally into Peru now that Peru has declared a state of emergency and has sent troops to the border to try to put a stop to that. So now these Venezuelans, it's gotta suck if you're from Venezuela because nobody wants you. You left Venezuela because people are eating their pets, but then wherever you go, people really don't like having you there. Part of the reason for that is because Venezuelans tend to make the crime rate rise. Many people who are used to existing in that environment are used to doing whatever they have to do to survive, including committing crimes, stealing. It's almost like if you're not cheating, you're not trying. If you get caught, you're just not trying hard enough. They go to Panama, they go to Chile, they go to Ecuador, Bolivia, wherever, and the crime rate starts to rise. And whether or not it's Venezuelans doing it, they get blamed for it. And that doesn't make people happy. We've got a big problem with, obviously, we've got a big problem with Venezuelan gang members and prison convicts and things like that who have come to the United States. President Trump has talked a lot about that. The Tren de Aragua and other cartel members, big problem. These migrants that are trying to get back into Venezuela, coming back through Panama now, and they're not walking through the Darien Gap again. They're actually going around. Like the Panamanian government wouldn't allow them to take a boat around the Darien Gap coming in, but on the way out, yeah, they're no problem. Get in a boat, 8 hours on a little skiff out at sea, and you're back in Colombia. Colombia is fairly friendly to Venezuelans, one of the only countries it is. It'll give them a work permit and let them stay because President Petro down there is very friendly with Nicolas Maduro. Even though it's quite costly for Colombia, they're allowing them to stay. These people are stuck between a rock and a hard place. The United States has been building up forces in the Caribbean and the Atlantic. Close to 20,000 troops are in the region. The U.S. military has been hitting alleged drug trafficking boats in the Caribbean and the Pacific. They've killed about 83 people now. They've hit 22 separate boats. Pete Hegseth is catching a lot of flack for the last strike because there were 11 people on a drug boat. It's pretty easy to tell that this is not a fishing boat because no fishing boat has 5 outboard motors on it and is 80 miles offshore. The videos that the Pentagon is putting out of these strikes are grainy, down-resed videos. The U.S. military has much better intel than what they're sharing. A lot of it is classified. They know everybody on these boats is a member of a gang that has been designated a foreign terrorist organization. So they're considered combatants. They're telling us they know where they're coming from, where they're going to, and what they're carrying, saying we are at a low-grade conflict, a non-international armed conflict with these cartels. And so we've started going kinetic on these guys and blowing them out of the water. It's hard to feel bad for the narco traffickers getting blown out of the water. I've heard a lot of people say, this is what I voted for. We're finally doing something tangible about the war on drugs. Instead of just trying to arrest our way out of it, we're going to start killing our way out of it. That will act as a better deterrent. This last strike, after they struck the boat, the ISR, the intelligence gathering platform overhead, noticed that there were 2 survivors who were clinging to the wreckage. We don't know if this actually happened or not, but what the Post reported was that Hegseth said, kill them all. And so they struck the boat again and killed the 2 survivors. If we are at a non-national armed conflict, so we're not at conflict with a nation, we're at conflict with a group of people that we have designated as terrorists, then the law of armed conflict would apply. That'd be like the Geneva Conventions. And under the law of armed conflict, it pretty clearly says once a combatant is out of the fight, they're no longer a threat. You have to rescue them and treat them with dignity and respect. That doesn't mean you can't arrest them. That doesn't mean you can't jail them after a trial, but you cannot just summarily execute them. It's not a great look for America to be blowing guys out of the water who are already injured, don't pose any threat any longer. Even if you say they did pose a threat when they were driving a boat filled with cocaine, and that cocaine represents a weapon against the American people. I get that argument, but the laws of armed conflict still apply. And those guys, once the boat is blown up and they're clinging to wreckage 80 miles offshore, they're no longer a threat to anybody. And so we would have the responsibility to rescue them, even if we then put them on trial or deported them or whatever we did with the other two survivors. There was another strike earlier in this operation where they had two survivors. One was Colombian and one was Venezuelan, I believe. Anybody who says they know what happened, who doesn't have access to the classified intel on that mission, is just making things up. We don't know what information the U.S. had. I wish they would be a little more transparent. I would like to give the benefit of the doubt and say they had compelling national security interests in mind when they ordered these strikes, but we just don't know. And anybody that says they do know that doesn't have access to that classified material is lying to you. So this is going to get adjudicated in the courts. There are people on both sides of this argument. And there are a lot of people saying this is a war crime, straight up extrajudicial killings, and we can't do that as Americans. If the United States does not hold itself to a higher standard and starts operating just by how we feel about certain groups of people, that can become a slippery slope very fast. And when a new presidential administration comes in, that might be taken up against Christians or homeschoolers or who knows what. So we have to be careful going down that path. Now, I think we should demand more information, more transparency from the U.S. military about these strikes. And I do think that it isn't a good look, but I'd like to just say that I trust Pete Hegseth to have his heart in the right place and to be carrying out these strikes. If what they're doing turns out to have been illegal, that will come out in the courts, and believe me, it's going to get prosecuted. Apparently, Nicolas Maduro had a phone call with President Trump last week. You could guess, based on the rhetoric that both of them have been putting out, President Trump has said since that phone call, look, I'm all for doing it the easy way and negotiating some form of appropriate settlement in this conflict. And so I'm happy to do it that way if Maduro is willing to play ball. But if he's not, then we can do it the hard way, and I'm fine either way. So that's probably close to what he told Maduro. Maduro has been, for his part, literally on television begging President Trump not to attack. Please, President Trump, we can work together to eradicate drugs, to get rid of the drugs. You don't have to attack us. Please, we just want peace, which sounds great. But if it's true that President Maduro is up to his eyeballs in the cartel de los soles and making big money off of the drug trade, and not just drugs, but weapons and people and other things that get smuggled through Venezuela to the north, then his conciliatory tone on one hand, where he's saying, we just want peace, and then his defiant tone on the other hand, where he was on television saying, the United States can't defeat Venezuela because Venezuela is completely invincible. I would say maybe not so much. He's privately facing some pretty serious pressure. There was a open source intel account on X that has been tracking Maduro's private aircraft, and apparently it took off from Caracas today and went to the Brazilian border, which is out in the middle of nowhere, out in the jungle. I don't know what exactly that means. It could be maybe President Maduro was arranging for a way to get out of Venezuela if ground invasion or something like that from the U.S. actually happens. The UN is declaring these strikes against these boats a war crime, and the European Union has also said that these are war crimes to the extent where Great Britain, for example, has stopped sharing intelligence with the United States. They're saying, we want no part of what you're doing because we think it's wrong. So they asked Rubio about that. This is what Rubio had to say.
The European Union gets to determine what international law is. They certainly don't get to determine is how the United States defends its national security. The United States is under attack from organized criminal narco-terrorists in our hemisphere, and the president is responding in the defense of our country. I do find it interesting that all these countries want us to send and supply, for example, nuclear-capable Tomahawk missiles to defend Europe. But when the United States positions aircraft carriers in our hemisphere where we live, somehow that's a problem. So I would say that the United States is, and this president has made very clear, his job is to protect the United States from threats against the United States, and that is what he's doing in this operation.
And we need to recognize asymmetric war as actual war. And in so doing, you make the case that these people that are pumping fentanyl and cocaine into our country are at war with the United States, and so we're going to go to war against them. And if we use kinetic means and they're using non-kinetic means, that doesn't really matter because they are actually trying to kill Americans. And they're succeeding at it. Inside Venezuela, their economy is now collapsing big time. The minimum wage in Venezuela is $1 a month. Nobody makes only $1 a month. The currency has deflated so badly. Everything is being dollarized in Venezuela. They don't use Venezuelan currency hardly at all anymore because it's so worthless. And the current inflation rate is something like 300% per year, and that's a lot lower than it has been. It's impossible for people to live on Venezuelan currency. That's why people are getting paid either in dollars or in cryptocurrency now inside Venezuela. You don't live on your salary. Everybody's got a side hustle or two or three. Multiple people in a house are working. You used to have multiple generations living together in one house and all of them contributing to the survival. But even still, they say that the basic food basket for a family costs about $500 a month. And the average amount of money that Venezuelans are making with all their side hustles and all their extra jobs and all that comes out to about $180 to $230 a month. So that means that Venezuelans are skipping meals because they don't have enough food. Children are literally fainting at school because they're so hungry. If you get sick, it's kind of a bad joke because if you need to buy medicine, the hospital doesn't have any medicine. You have to go buy it and bring it to the hospital, and then they will administer it to you. But you have to buy the medicine in dollars, and if you're getting paid in Bolivarian pesos, you're just out of luck. So medications are inaccessible. Electricity and water are unreliable in most of the country now. Things are just falling apart. And this is an outgrowth of socialism. This is what you should expect in a socialist country, because a socialist system removes the impetus to self-improvement. Meaning, if everybody gets paid the same no matter what, then why work hard? Why do a good job? Why not do just the bare minimum to get by and not get fired? Repression since the elections last year that Maduro lost, and lost bad, and he didn't want to leave office, so he just jacked up the repression on the people. There's extrajudicial killings, there's people being disappeared, there's all sorts of persecution happening by the government. And it's not so much the police you have to worry about, it's the gangs, because Maduro has recruited the gangs to do his dirty work. And so if you are flagged for being a rebel in any way, then you may get a visit from the colectivos who are going to break your kneecaps and rape your wife and burn your house down. So the repression is very bad. Censorship is terrible. Crackdowns on NGOs, not allowing NGOs that are trying to bring aid into the country. Maduro, in his pride, is saying, we don't need any stinking aid. We're just fine. And so people go hungry because there are NGOs in Colombia that are trying to move food into Venezuela, and they're not being allowed to do so. When you look at remittances, this is money being sent back into Venezuela from Venezuelans outside the country. Remittances amount to $4.5 to $5 billion every year. A large share of that comes from the United States. And this is really how the people are surviving. At least 30% of the people who are still in Venezuela receive some sort of remittance money from outside the country. A good couple $100 million a month of that comes from the United States. Venezuelan migrants in the U.S. illegally who are working and sending money back home. So now, what is about to happen? President Trump keeps saying, we're stopping them at sea. We're not seeing a lot of boats right now because people don't want to get blown out of the water. I talked about this yesterday on the live, that he's saying it's easier to stop it when it goes by land. That's not true. It is actually quite a bit harder to stop it when it goes by land because it's harder to tell who's trafficking the drugs and what vehicles are carrying the drugs and where they're going. But President Trump is still threatening that we could see ground strikes on Venezuela very soon. I would say the quicker way to get Maduro out of office is to crack down on those two methods by which the nation is getting money brought into it. So if you stop the remittances, that's going to hurt the average Venezuelan living in Venezuela. The reason why Maduro is still in office is because the Venezuelans have not got uncomfortable enough yet. If they got uncomfortable enough, they would rise up and overthrow the Venezuelan government. That's my opinion on the matter. And we could certainly make the government a lot more uncomfortable by telling Chevron that for the foreseeable future, you cannot take any oil out of Venezuela, and we'll just have to deal with the issue of our own refineries and all that until Maduro is gone. I think that could get Maduro out of there rather quickly if we were able to do that.